It was a Tuesday morning, not even 7, and the first thing I heard wasn't the rooster or the coffee pot sputtering. It was engines. Loud, grinding, arrogant engines, like a swarm of metal wasps attacking the peace I'd spent 40 years building on this land. I yanked on my boots, still half asleep, and ran outside, coffee mug in hand, and I just froze solid. Across my south grazing field, the one my grandfather called the sunset pasture, there was a line of blindingly orange construction vehicles roaring, pushing earth and laying down asphalt. Fresh, steaming black asphalt, slicing through 3 generations of my family's soil like a surgical cut, cold and permanent. Workers were shouting, steam was hissing, and right in the middle of it all, standing like a general claiming enemy territory, was Eleanor Vance. Pink pencil skirt, white silk blouse, a high blonde helmet of hair, and that damn clipboard. She was the president of the Magnolia Creek Estates Homeowners Association, and she was smiling like she'd just been crowned queen of Manhattan, not my little corner of rural Tennessee. They didn't ask. They didn't call. They didn't even send a junk mail flyer. They just did it. I yelled so loud the dust seemed to settle. The workers stopped, and my poor cattle looked up from the fence line, confused. Eleanor, she didn't even flinch. She just tilted her head, raised a perfectly manicured hand, and waved at me, like I was the gardener who showed up late. That's when it wasn't just anger anymore. It was cold, focused, white-hot fury. You can steal my quiet, you can build your beige, cookie-cutter world, but you will not pave over my history. Not on this dirt. Not today. Because this farm, the old Ridgeline Ranch, was about to become the biggest, messiest, most expensive headache the Magnolia Creek HOA had ever bought a ticket for. Before we dive into how I started this war, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a run-in with a power-tripping HOA. Hit that like and subscribe button, because this story, it gets real, fast. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glossy black tire tracks, a dark, oily scar across the field my father worked until the day he died. The smell of fresh asphalt hung in the morning air, synthetic and wrong. My cows were pressing against the barbed wire, milling nervously where soft grass used to be, now replaced by the curb of a new road. I wanted to take the excavator myself and just rip the whole damn thing out, but 70 years on this land teaches you something. Sometimes the deepest revenge is patience. So, instead of a fight in the field, I put on my cleanest shirt, tucked in my collar, and drove straight into the heart of their plastic suburbia, the place they called the Magnolia Creek Community Center. It was all stucco and identical mailboxes, perfect lawns that looked thirsty for rain, and people who waved with forced enthusiasm while secretly judging the trim on your hedges. The sign out front should have read, "Where community comes first," right after conformity. I walked into the office and the smell hit me. Cheap perfume, toner, and a faint, stale odor of faux authority. There she was, Eleanor, behind a polished desk, blonde hair sculpted like a crash helmet, and in her hands, the source of her immortal power, the clipboard. "Clayton," she sang, like we were old college friends sharing iced tea. What a surprise. To what do we owe the honor? I kept my voice dead level, fighting the tremor in my jaw. "You can start by explaining why there's a 2-lane road slicing through the middle of my south pasture, Eleanor." Her smile twitched, just a hair. "Oh, that. Isn't it just gorgeous? It's part of our new Access and Beautification Initiative. It allows residents in the new Summit View phase an easier route to the community clubhouse and the 109 highway. It's for the greater good, you see." "Greater good," I repeated, my tone dropping low. "Eleanor, that road runs through my farm. My cattle don't need easier access to the tennis courts." She gave that tight little chuckle, the kind of sound people make when they truly believe they're smarter than you. She flipped a page on her clipboard like it was the 10 Commandments. "The board voted unanimously on it, Clayton." "I didn't vote on it," I said. "Well, of course not. You're technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction," she replied, sighing like a kindergarten teacher explaining why we can't eat the crayons. "The fact is, it's not private property anymore. The board had to reallocate that strip of land for necessary infrastructure." That word, reallocate, it was like a trigger. Reallocate? Eleanor, you cannot reallocate land you don't own. You paved over 3 generations of my family's work, and you turned it into a shortcut for SUVs. Her eyes narrowed. "Change can be uncomfortable, Clayton. but it's for the community's benefit. You don't want to be the difficult neighbor, do you? I clenched my teeth so hard I thought they might crack. No, Eleanor, I said softly, turning toward the door. But I do have a history of being a very persistent one. Behind me, I could hear her whisper to her assistant, smug as ever. He'll come around. They always do. They always do. Not this time. That night, I drove my fence line. The moonlight traced the road's edge, a glistening, black snake of tar. It was a message they were sending. You don't belong here anymore. But I wasn't going to roll over. I pulled out my father's old farm notebook, flipped to a blank page, and started writing. Step 1, lawyer. Step 2, deeds and surveys. Step 3, every damn receipt. Step 4, burn them down with paperwork. My father used to say, you can't fight a fool with fists, son. You fight him with proof. I drove to see Tom Davies the next morning. Tom had been my friend since second grade, swapping a fire hose for a briefcase after his stint as a volunteer firefighter. His office smelled like bacon and slightly burnt coffee, which I always took as a good sign. When I dropped the thick envelope of photos on his desk, asphalt, painted lines, a stop sign rooted in my soil, his smirk died instantly. Eleanor Vance did this, he whistled low. Queen of Magnolia Creek? She'd fine you for breathing too loud near a rose bush. She called it a reallocation. Tom. He leaned back, chair creaking a protest. She said that? Like she was planting a flag on the moon? Jesus, Clay, an HOA can't just annex land they don't own. That's not how property law works in this county. He told me the plan. We were going to keep it clean. Don't touch the road. Don't block it. Not yet, he warned. The second you put up a barrier, they scream obstruction. We play by the book, while they choke on the pages. I liked that plan. It was patient, and frankly, more satisfying. We went through my land deeds, dating back to 1951. Every inch of that south pasture was mine. The HOA's jurisdiction stopped exactly 300 yards short of my fence. Tom highlighted every legal boundary like he was drawing battle lines. He'd draft the cease and desist, and I would gather everything else. Photos, timestamps, and paper thick enough to bury Eleanor's ego. I spent the next week turning into a self-taught paralegal. The key was to prove malice and fraud, not just a mistake. I started digging into the county records office. I found the HOA had submitted an infrastructure improvement request 6 months ago. The permit covered their own streets, not private farmland. Yet, somehow, the invoices I later discovered were marked, Ridgeline Ranch Access Point completed. They had falsified construction paperwork. Bingo. But the real treasure came when I tracked down their contractor. The invoices were from a company called Summit Ridge Construction. I drove to the address listed on their letterhead, an empty, overgrown lot next to an abandoned hardware store. The company didn't exist. Eleanor had fabricated a construction company to launder HOA funds and build the road illegally, hoping to pass the cost to the new phase residents. This wasn't just a boundary dispute anymore. This was a full-blown corruption case, fueled by a pink blazer and a clipboard. I found my father's old shoebox of papers, and inside were the original, yellowed county zoning letters from the 60s, confirming our property lines hadn't shifted since before Magnolia Creek was even a dream. It felt like my dad was helping me fight from the grave. I had the paper trail, but I needed the narrative. I started visiting the neighbors. First, the old Wilsons, who'd been there since before the development took over. Eleanor fined us $500, Mrs. Wilson whispered, shaking, for planting zinnias instead of marigolds. Said they weren't aesthetically complimentary to the community palette. Then the Garcias, who had their driveway pressure washed without consent and were billed $700 for the mandatory surface revitalization service. Every conversation painted the same picture, a power-mad dictator in khaki shorts. By the end of the week, I had 6 written statements and an evidence binder thick enough to stop a bullet. We're ready, Tom, I told him that Sunday evening. You're not just ready, Clay, he chuckled. You've built the damn gallows. But the waiting was killing me. Every car that used that shortcut, every jogger that waved, felt like a mockery. Patience had run its course. The legal papers were filed, the injunction was moving through the system, but I needed to reclaim my space now. So, on a bright, blistering Saturday morning, I fired up the old John Deere 6400, the one my dad bought back in '88, the one that smells like diesel and sweat. I rumbled toward the south pasture. the cows trotting along beside me like curious spectators. The road shimmered in the heat, a black, oily mirror reflecting the sky. I parked the tractor dead center, right across both lanes. Then I went to the barn and hauled out two massive, 300-pound round hay bales and set them down on either side of the John Deere like twin pillars of defiance. The final touch, a hand-painted sign I pounded into the soil, private property. Trespassers will be sued. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. Not 10 minutes later, I heard the whisper of a Lexus SUV coming down the illegal slope. It stopped yards from the blockade. Out stepped Eleanor. Pink skirt, sunglasses, and the indestructible clipboard clutched to her chest. Behind her, 3 other board members trickled out of their matching vehicles, their faces the picture of righteous indignation. Her heels clicked on the asphalt like a death knell. "Clayton," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "What is the meaning of this absolute obstruction?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "It's a blockade, Eleanor. I figured you'd recognize a construction project when you saw one. You are obstructing a designated community road," she snapped, her voice rising to a dangerous register. "A community road built illegally on private property," I corrected, stepping forward. "My property. You can call it what you want, but it stops here." Her entourage exchanged nervous glances. One man in a polo shirt muttered, "This is absolutely against the bylaws." I pointed at him. "Funny thing about those bylaws, pal. They stop matching at the edge of the HOA's territory, and that edge is 300 yards north of where you're currently standing. You're trespassing." Eleanor's smile vanished. "You are making a grave mistake, Clayton. The community will not stand for this kind of vandalism." "Oh, I think they will," I said, nodding toward the fence line. She spun around and froze. Half a dozen neighbors stood there, phones out, filming. The Wilsons, the Garcias, even Mrs. Henderson, the sweet little widow from Maple Street, holding a thermos like she was tailgating a revolution. Someone yelled, "Tell her to get off your land, Clay." Eleanor's cheeks flushed crimson. "Put those phones away. This is private." "Private?" I interrupted, raising my voice so the cameras could catch it. "Now you care about private?" The crowd laughed. Even the cows mooed, like they were in on the joke. "I will have the sheriff out here within the hour," she spat, clipboard trembling. "Good," I said calmly. "He eats my wife's blackberry pie every Thanksgiving. Maybe he'll stay for dessert." She turned on her heel and stormed back to the Lexus, her little army scrambling behind her. As their cars disappeared in a cloud of expensive dust, the neighbors cheered. Mrs. Henderson walked over, handing me a massive, freshly baked sugar cookie. "You looked like you needed something sweeter than Eleanor's temper, dear." I laughed. That was the day I realized I wasn't fighting a lonely battle against a bully. I was fighting for everyone she had ever crushed with a fine and a piece of laminated paper. The next day, the news van showed up. "My little blockade went viral. Farmer versus fascist HOA" was the headline. The local paper quoted me as saying, "They paved the wrong man's land." Eleanor was panicking. She sent 2 rent-a-cops, Oakwood Community Safety Division officers, to remove the tractor. They took one look at my survey marker, listened to me calmly recite the property code, and sheepishly backed down. Then came the final move. The HOA filed a lawsuit against me for obstruction. "Perfect." She walked right into the trap, Tom told me. "She thinks she's dragging you to court, but she's just stepping into the spotlight, and we have the script." The courthouse smelled like dust, old paper, and the faint, cold scent of slow-moving justice. When Tom and I walked into the courtroom, Eleanor and her slick-haired lawyer were already there. She looked supremely confident, untouchable. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Justice Avery, scanned the paperwork. "We are here for the case of Magnolia Creek Estates HOA versus Clayton Miller. The HOA alleges obstruction of community access. Mr. Miller has filed a countersuit for illegal construction, fraud, and trespass." Eleanor's lawyer stood up first, trying to sound important. "Your Honor, this is not about boundaries. It is about community welfare. Mr. Miller has chosen to vandalize necessary infrastructure." Tom stood up slowly. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was a steel spike. "Your Honor, the HOA didn't construct a road. They trespassed, vandalized, and fraudulently paved over private farmland held by my client for 75 years. They did not seek permission. They did not obtain permits. What they did was reckless, criminal, and fundamentally arrogant. He dropped the evidence binder on the table. Thud. It was the sound of an empire crumbling. He started with the land deeds, showing the 1951 county survey. Then the photos of my fence posts torn out. Then the grand finale. These, Your Honor, Tom said, holding up the invoices, are the expenses signed by Mrs. Vance to a contractor called Summit Ridge Construction. We found the address. It is an empty lot. The phone number is disconnected. The HOA created a shell company to funnel community funds into a private, illegal project built on someone else's property. Eleanor's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Speculative. Overruled. Justice Avery said flatly. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Wilson, frail but firm, testifying about the tyrannical enforcement of aesthetics. Then Mrs. Henderson took the stand, her voice clear and ringing. I asked Mrs. Vance about the road construction that morning, she testified. And she told me, we make the rules here. Well, I suppose she's about to learn what happens when the rules fight back. The courtroom buzzed. When Eleanor took the stand, her confidence had evaporated. Tom cross-examined her, deadly calm. Mrs. Vance, did you confirm the property boundaries with the county recorder's office before breaking ground? I relied on our internal maps, she stammered. And did you obtain the proper county permit for a new public road? Her pause lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. It was under review. Tom smiled, a slow, predatory grin. He pulled out the smoking gun, an email from Eleanor to her assistant. Mrs. Vance, this is a message where you inform your assistant that you've dealt with the Miller problem, and we make the rules here. Is this a misquote, or did you, in fact, tell people you had the authority to illegally seize private land? She just stared at him, unable to speak, her polished mask shattered. The gavel came down like thunder. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Clayton Miller. Justice Avery's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. The HOA constructed an unauthorized structure on private property, falsified documentation, and misappropriated community funds. The road will be removed at the HOA's expense. Damages awarded to Mr. Miller. Full restoration of property, and significant punitive compensation for criminal trespass. She turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, I suggest you step down from your post before the county prosecutor investigates this further. Eleanor Vance went pale, then red, then stormed out of the courtroom, dodging the cameras, her empire collapsing around her. Tom just shook my hand, grinning wide. Told you we'd bury them, Clay. The air on the farm the next morning felt cleaner than it had in months. 3 days later, the real demolition crew arrived, county contractors hired by the terrified, newly reformed HOA board. They weren't the clipboard crowd. These were men in mud-stained boots who shook my hand and called the road the dumbest damn thing we've ever had to rip out. The neighbors showed up again. Mrs. Henderson brought folding chairs and a fresh batch of sugar cookies. The Wilsons brought lemonade. It was a true community event, celebrating the unpaving of the land. When the last slab of asphalt was hauled away, there was only a rough, dark scar of dirt left. I walked out across it, barefoot, feeling the cool, rough soil under my feet again. It was uneven, raw, but it was real. The next morning, I fired up the John Deere. The same machine that stood in defiance was now bringing life back to the land. I plowed the first furrow over the path, the dark earth curling over the scar like it was swallowing the past. A week later, the grass was already beginning to sprout. The cows grazed lazily, reclaiming their territory. Eleanor was gone. Word was she'd sold her house and moved 2 counties over, perhaps still fighting fines of her own. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the patch of new green on my field. The local news did a follow-up. The reporter asked me, Mr. Miller, what message would you give to anyone dealing with an overreaching HOA or a bully with a title? I looked out across the pasture, the wind tugging at my hat. Stand your ground, I said simply. They might have money, rules, and fine print, but you have the truth. And the truth doesn't need a permit to exist. I took off my hat, closed my eyes, and whispered, We did it, Dad. A breeze passed through the oak trees, soft and low, like an answer. People say you can't fight City Hall, but this wasn't about City Hall. This was about respect. What Eleanor and her board forgot is that community doesn't come from rules on a clipboard. It comes from decency. You can build all the fences and bylaws you want, but if you trample the people who live behind them, sooner or later, they will stand up. So, tell me in the comments below, if they had paved a road through your property, what would have been your very first move? Would you have called Tom, or would you have gotten on the tractor first? Let me know your thoughts, and please share this with anyone you know who needs a little reminder that one person, armed with the truth, can always win against a bully.